Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for your attendance. Would like to acknowledge some guests that are with us this afternoon. Certainly representing city administration, my boss, the city manager, Jim Borey, a couple of our elected officials, Vice Mayor Rob Coleman and Dr. Sandra Cherry from City Council, and our elected sheriff, Gabe Morgan. Appreciate them all being here. Also in attendance today is Commonwealth Attorney Howard Gwynn, who of course has an independent review role that we'll talk about a little bit in a few minutes. Today's press conference is designed to update on our investigation progress to date and provide information about the circumstances of the officer-involved shooting on July 4th. I'd like to start by reiterating our sympathies to the family of Mr. Beaty for their loss. We've tried our best to respect their need for grieving time while following up on our investigation and offering to brief them on information such that we're going to share with you all today. I also wish to express the gratitude of our entire department for those community members who have not only kept Mr. Beaty's family in their thoughts and prayers, but have reached out to the family of the Newport News Police Department. As I'm sure everyone realizes, no one in policing takes joy in the unfortunate death of another. We all understand and believe in the mantra that all lives matter. And we continue to care and provide care and concern for those members of our department who were involved in this incident. Just to recap, a narcotics detective who was working secondary employment in a housing complex received information a bit before 1:00 a.m. on July 4th about a person armed with a sawed-off shotgun. The officer called for a couple of additional officers, and a South Precinct sergeant and a citywide canine officer responded. Now, we've said previously that all of our other South Precinct officers were on other calls for service, and that's why we didn't have an officer there with the body-worn camera. And that statement has been called to question by some folks. It is not unusual in this city or any other community that at times of the day during peak calls for service, all on-duty personnel may be involved in a call for service. That doesn't mean that those are all high priority calls or that an officer couldn't get pulled off of a routine lower priority call if a higher priority call comes in. At the time of this request, for example, there was no indication that an emergency response was needed or a need to pull off any of those units from lower priority calls, given that there were 2 available units in the vicinity close by and available. In fact, in the immediate aftermath of the shooting, multiple units from South Precinct and some even from other areas of the city immediately proceeded to the scene. This merely explains, and our purpose in explaining this then and again today, is to explain that given the assignment of the officers who were there, why there was no video camera. And as we stated at our first press conference, the additional 125 video cameras that have been on order for a few weeks would most likely assure that at least 1 or 2, if not all 3, of the officers who were on scene would be equipped with a camera in the future. Now, the 3 officers came together at approximately 1 a.m. and talked about tactics, and subsequently, about 45 minutes after that, the detective received an update as to the location and direction that the subject armed with the shotgun was walking. The information provided a detailed clothing description, camouflage, military-style jacket, and blue jeans. The detective proceeded north on Oak Street, kept in coordination with the other two officers, and as the officer approached 18th Street, observed two people, including the person wearing a long-sleeve camouflage military-style jacket and blue jeans. It was about that same time that the sergeant pulled up on the scene as well, and the two of them exited their squad cars and verbally engaged the two people, saying, "We need to speak." It was at that time that the detective observed Mr. Beaty's left arm to be held stiffly and close, tightly to his left side. But other than that, there was no shotgun visible to the detective or the sergeant. The one individual stopped. Mr. Beaty kept walking, and the officers reiterated, "Sir, we really need to speak with you." And at that point, Mr. Beaty began to run up 18th Street towards Peterson Place. Again, they noticed that he still maintained that stiff arm. And about that time, the canine officer arrived and exited their squad car and initially did not deploy their canine. As the foot pursuit, though, started, the canine officer, anticipating possibly having to do a track, returned to their car and retrieved their dog, their partner. But at that point, they were far enough back that they were kind of out of the pursuit and approached along the sidewalk. Now, as you go down 18th Street, approaching Peterson Place, on the right-hand side, the south side, the sidewalk adjacent to it is kind of a hill that goes up the grassy area. And Mr. Beaty ran up that hill with the sergeant and the detective in pursuit. The canine officer, meanwhile, stayed at the sidewalk level. At some point when they were approaching the buildings, their two apartment buildings, Mr. Beaty made a turn in direction, and at that point, all three officers observed a sawed-off shotgun being held by a pistol grip by Mr. Beaty. At that point, they withdrew their weapons and gave the command, "Drop the gun, drop the gun." An independent witness who was not visually in a position to see what was going on has given us a statement that he heard officers give the command, "Drop the gun." Subsequently, officers observed Mr. Beaty begin to turn in the direction of the sergeant, and the canine officer and the detective observed the shotgun being raised in the direction of the detective. At that point, the detective believed the sergeant was in imminent danger of being shot by the shotgun, and he fired 3 rounds. All 3 shell casings were located in the grass and used to approximate the location of where the detective was when he fired his gun. No other shots were fired, and one round struck Mr. Beaty in the head, and he immediately dropped to the ground. The sergeant, who was the closest at that time, immediately moved the shotgun from the area of Mr. Beaty's feet to a safer distance, as officers are trained to do in shooting events involving armed persons. It's unknown to the officers immediately after a shooting what continued threat the armed subject may pose, and so they always try to distance known threats, such as the gun, from the subject. Radio traffic confirms that medical assistance was summoned immediately upon notification that shots had been fired. The shotgun was located by forensic technicians approximately 10 feet from Mr. Beaty's feet. The technician, not knowing that the sergeant had moved the weapon, asked another officer on scene to make safe the weapon before the technician began to process it. And at that time, it was determined there were no shells inside the weapon. The shotgun has been delivered to the state crime lab for fingerprint and DNA examination. We have contacted top state officials and requested that this examination be expedited, and they have agreed to do that. The original owner of the shotgun, who reported it stolen in a burglary, has been interviewed, and the Hampton Police Department is reviewing that case in light of the weapon being recovered from Mr. Beaty. Based upon statements and the physical evidence, we believe the detective who fired the shots was between 20 and 30 feet from Mr. Beaty when the 3 shots were fired. The investigating detectives in this case have finished their interviews of all the involved officers, the known witnesses, other responding officers, and fire personnel. Persons who were identified as potential witnesses have also been interviewed. So far, over 20 interviews have taken place, and detectives have completed canvassing the neighborhood as well. Although the canvass and the interviews have been completed, we are still following up on any additional information that is received. There is misinformation being disseminated in the community, and while it's inconsistent with evidence and known facts, we still follow up on all that information and talking to even potential witnesses. And we encourage anyone with information to contact the department. The radio traffic has been collected and transcribed. The detective's cell phone data has been downloaded, and Mr. Beaty's cell phone is being analyzed by the Virginia State Police due to the fact that our agency does not have the technology to do that on that particular model or type of phone. The department has not received the autopsy report from the medical examiner. Typically, we would not receive that until they've completed their review, including toxicology reports, which take some time to return from the lab. At this point, the department anticipates its criminal investigation will be done sometime perhaps in the latter part of August, but that's merely an estimation at this point. And that does not include those elements outside our control, such as the findings of the crime lab, the cell phone info from the state police, or the autopsy report. Once the case is completed, including the completed autopsy report, it will be forwarded to the Commonwealth Attorney's Office for review. There's a national discussion going on among police leaders as to the issue of releasing the name of the involved officers. Now, the historic policy and practice of the Newport News Police has been to not release that information. And in fact, our current policy specifically prohibits that pertaining to witness or actor information prior to any criminal charges being filed. We've consulted with several police leaders who have implemented various policies that allow for some information release at some point in time. We've also consulted with community leaders, including pastors known as the concerned clergy, who urged us to be fair and consistent and to follow our policies the same in all cases. One of the aspects that other police agencies have advised us that always influences their decision to release information is the presence of intelligence on threats to the officers involved. Now, we've taken all of these factors into consideration and then consulted with the Commonwealth Attorney. And our conclusion on this issue is that at the time the Commonwealth Attorney announces their findings as a result of the review, the name of the officer who fired the shots may be released. In the meantime, we can provide the following limited background. The narcotics detective who fired the shots has 8 years with the Newport News Police Department and has been involved in one prior officer-involved shooting. The canine officer has 10 years with the Newport News Police Department and has not been involved in any prior officer-involved shootings. And the sergeant has 9 years on the Newport News Police Department and has not been involved in any officer-involved shooting. All 3 officers have completed mandatory psychological review, and the detective who fired the shots remains on administrative duty. Now, since our first press conference, our public information officer has received many requests for questions, some of which we cannot address as they remain subject to the review of the Commonwealth Attorney. However, we'll try and address those that we can. First, the first question was, have we finished the background report on Mr. Beaty, and what does it show about his criminal record? We have completed much of the background workup. However, his criminal record or any other details of his personal life are really not germane to this incident. And, our goal is not to demonize anyone involved in this. We're staying focused on the facts on this case surrounding this incident at the time this occurred. Another question, was Mr. Beaty wearing a coat or long sleeve shirt to have concealed the shotgun? At the time of the incident, he was wearing a camo military style jacket, and that has been sent to the lab for analysis by the medical examiner. We've been asked, why did officers chase Mr. Beaty rather than the other man he was with? Well, we were looking for one individual who was reportedly armed with a sawed-off shotgun. Mr. Beaty was a match to the description given, and his action to flee the officers and the stiff-armed posture gave officers further reasonable suspicion to warrant their further investigation. Finally, we were asked, were the officers carrying tasers at the time, and if so, could they have been used? Tasers require a certain proximity between the officer for the probes to reach, and that wasn't in play in this incident. And they are routinely not used in foot pursuits, nor when a person is holding a weapon, for the physical reaction that the body has to the taser can lead to falling and or involuntary muscle action. And that could result in a weapon discharge. So it would not have been prudent, and that's why tasers aren't even a consideration in this matter. Also, officers are trained to understand the physics and mechanics of assaultive behavior. A person with a gun already in their hand who can plan on taking a specific action under normal conditions can act faster than an officer can react. And the delay in arming yourself with your handgun or another weapon can literally cost an officer their life. So they reacted as best we can determine appropriately to the threat that was posed. Finally, it's very important, we believe, that the media and our community have some context at the rarity of officers in Newport News having to use deadly force, even when faced with weapons. In the last 5 years, we have had a total of 9 occurrences where officers discharged their weapons at suspects. In 4 of those incidents, the suspect was struck and wounded by officers. In 3 of those incidents, the officers missed and the suspect was not wounded. And in 2 of those incidents, the suspect was killed by the gunfire. The last time an incident occurred in which there was a fatal officer-involved shooting was 2011. Over this same 5-year period, in 2 of those incidents, officers were shot by the suspects. One was seriously wounded by 2 gunshot wounds, but recovered and returned to work. In the period of January through July 8th, so basically the first half of this year, Newport News Police have responded to 78,143 calls for service. Of those, just under 1,200 indicated that a firearm was involved. And that can be anywhere from gunshots heard, a shooting, an armed person. A total of 432 incident reports written by officers involve firearms, such as a robbery, a shooting, discharge of a firearm, or damage to property by a firearm. And in 99 incidents, officers came in contact with subjects armed with a firearm. Sometimes those subjects had the gun concealed. Other times it might have been concealed under the seat of a vehicle or in the console. So far this year, we have seized 283 firearms off the streets. Less than 24 hours from this shooting is a great example of the restraint that is normally shown routinely by officers of our department. We had officers respond to a report of a subject armed with a shotgun, and the officers observed a small group, 2 or 3 people, one of whom was carrying a shotgun, and a foot pursuit ensued. The officers continued to the pursuit, and the subject threw the shotgun down. Subjects were taken into custody and the gun was recovered. That's the routine in Newport News. Obviously, the distinction from this incident was the gun was not disposed and was brandished to the degree that an officer felt an imminent threat to themselves or the life of a fellow officer. So that's what we know so far, and we can take a few limited questions on any issues we may not have covered.
Chief, I know that the family is calling for a federal investigation. What's your reaction to that?
Well, of course, people outside of policing don't always understand how the criminal justice system works. As a matter of routine, we contacted the FBI a week and a half ago. The federal government doesn't have jurisdiction on local events like homicides and local crimes, but nevertheless, we offered if the FBI was interested in assigning an agent to be part of our team. They declined that opportunity. We've been in contact with Department of Justice Community Relations Services and the U.S. Attorney's Office just to offer briefings and make them aware of the incident. Routinely, the federal government will only get involved in violations under which they have jurisdiction, which could be a civil rights violation or some other federal crime or offense. So understanding that, we're happy to cooperate with whatever agency notifies us or contacts us.
The previous shooting that the officer was involved in, can you tell us a little bit what happened there? Did he miss? Did he injure somebody? Was that one of the cases where somebody died?
We're not prepared to discuss any terms of the previous shooting involving that officer or any other officer.
Can you at least say when, what year?
I wasn't here. I can't tell you what year. It's before I arrived, certainly.
Can you say, sir, if the officer involved in that shooting was disciplined in that shooting?
Well, we don't routinely disclose any internal affairs results or anything like that. You know, IA records are not subject to release, and so it would be inappropriate to discuss that.
Was it ruled justified?
You know, I haven't looked at the case. I'm aware of some prior shootings. The only two officer-involved shooting cases I've looked at are the two we sat down with your fellow reporter and went over a week or so ago. Those are closed out, dating back to 2011, but those are the only two I've seen.
Are you comfortable that that the gun pointed at the officer, at the sergeant, when the narcotics officer opened fire?
Well, I said last week and I said this week that at least two of the officers, their perception was that the gun was being pointed in the direction of the sergeant at the time the shots were fired.
Have you reached out to the family involved and had any contact with them, or have they had any contact with you to give them answers to what happened?
Well, for example, we reached out and offered to brief them on the information we're providing you today ahead of time. We understand that you know, folks tend not to like to hear things in the media that involve them directly, but we did not get return calls on that, and that's fine. Whatever people are comfortable with. I know we've had the morning of the shooting some conversation with them. I did personally, and our chaplains assigned have offered follow-up communication with the family members, but you know, we can offer, and it's up to each individual as to how much contact and follow-up they'd like to have with us.
Why did you decide to keep this internal and not hand it over to state police or another agency?
Well, as you know, we're in the early discussions with some of our regional partners to explore a regional officer-involved shooting team, but we really don't have that resource today. The state police are mentioned in the Hampton Roads area. The state police are primarily a highway patrol. They do limited investigations in our area. They have to bring detectives in from some distance. They do have expert resources, but they're just not geared up for that type of investigation. And in talking with some of my colleagues throughout Hampton Roads, some of the issues on delays and crime scene management, how long it can take to clear a crime scene and so on, it seemed completely unreasonable. The other factor is our homicide unit is investigating this, and most of you know we've experienced an unfortunate spike in homicides. I don't know another group of investigators in this area more skilled or qualified at conducting these kind of investigations. You want to have your A team conducting a critical investigation, and that's what we have on this case.
The witness that heard the officers, that heard the officers yell, "Drop it, drop it." Can you say anything about where he was situated? I know you said he wasn't in a position to actually see it, but he heard it. How far was he, and was he in a residence? Was he on the street in a car? How did he?
But the only thing I could respond to that is he was within earshot of the incident. And I think until the information on all witnesses is presented to the Commonwealth Attorney's Office, it'd be inappropriate to go into those kind of details. That could interfere with their fair and impartial review of the matter.
I just want to make sure I'm clear on the shotgun. You said there were no shells in it, so that it wasn't loaded, he couldn't have fired the weapon. I mean, is that correct?
Correct. Okay, well, we thank you for your attendance, and most of you already know well in advance how to contact our public information officer. We anticipate, again, I gave you the timeline, and if we get any other details back that are appropriate to release, we will do that through Lou's office. Thank you.